Liam of Carcanne. Chapter 8. Troll. Part 2. Again, the three adventurers awoke before dawn the following morning. There was no time for a hot cup of tea or much in the way of breakfast. A handful of dried fruits and a stick of jerky to gnaw on while tying their shoes was all they could afford. Armed with the knowledge of their enemy's true nature, the party packed lighter than they had the day before. Swords were deemed useless and left stored in safe places around the tent. Daggers and knives were kept solely for their utility. Otto kept his bow, as many of his magics were centered around its projectiles. But ultimately, all but items not of utmost necessity were left behind in the name of efficiency and personal mobility. "Are you seriously wearing that?" Nori asked Otto after the two had stepped from the tent and into the open air of the forest. "This?" Otto looked down to his gray tunic and brown pants. "What's wrong with it?" "Where is your armor?" "I'm wearing it." He kicked a boot against the greaves secured to his shins. "Where is the rest?" "I thought we were going for light and mobile." "There's light and mobile, and then there's defenseless." Nori's face bunched up as he took another look over Otto's chosen clothes for the day. All that remained of his armor was the greaves and the elbow cops pinned to his coat. Even his gloves were missing. "I want to be able to move." Otto patted his chest with a naked hand. "It's not like an extra layer of leather is going to do much against the troll anyway." "You'd be surprised," Liam spoke up. Both he and Nori, the two who were actually struck by the beast, had chosen to remove none of their protective gear. If anything, Liam wished he had purchased more of it. "I'd rather be free to get out of its way than rely on an extra inch of cowhide when it hits me." Otto started walking toward the trail, ending any arguments his friends might have against his carelessness. "You'll regret it if it gets its hands on you," Nori called after him. "If it gets its hands on me, I doubt a leather jerkin is going to do much good anyways," Otto replied without turning back. Liam and Nori followed him out onto the dark trail, heads shaking in unison. On this morning, following the path to the trailhead took less time than Liam expected. Along this stretch of the journey, the trio did little to hide their presence from the world. They would have known if the troll made it this close to camp in the night. The screaming would have told them so. Much like the day before, Liam spent the walk turning through his concerns for the day, trying to separate reasonable fears from useless anxieties. He already expressed his concerns with the plan the night before, and the two senior adventurers had knocked him down with seemingly sound logic. Still, Liam worried. The plan hinged on the troll's strange wooden nature, and as the only party member who touched it, he remained wary. Otto better be right about all of this. If things go wrong this time, there might not be any walking away from it, Liam thought to himself in a moment of quiet. Coming to the trailhead in under an hour, the party switched gears. The moment one of them laid eyes on the clearing, the party fell into planned silence. Wasting as little time as possible, the trio crossed the clearing where Aster left them the day before and headed straight for the troll tunnel. Once inside, it took mere moments for Otto to spot what had eluded him the day before. Dotted across the mud and worn grass of the underbrush, large circular impressions roamed across the ground. The prints were massive, well over a foot across, but far shallower than Liam expected them to be. It was obvious to him how Otto would have missed them when busy looking for the well-defined tracks of hobgoblins. The hunter, however, was far less forgiving, continuing to admonish himself over missing them the day before. The dim light of the sun filtered its way into the woods, and slowly the trio was able to make out more and more of their surroundings. Nothing seemed to have changed in the space since their hurried passage back to camp the day before. Even though caution forced them to slow, they still made better time than they did when stopping to track the non-existent hobgoblins. This time, it was still mid-morning when the tunnel broke through the tree line, and they found themselves looking across the wide creek. "Holy!" The word escaped from Liam's mouth before he could slam it shut again. The banks of the creek had been ravaged, its gently sloping stone shores torn apart by the fury of the troll. Many of the rocks they had walked across the day before were now reduced to piles of rubble. Even the boulder they had lunched at the day before lay mostly submerged beneath the creek's rushing waters. Liam's shoulders slumped as he took in the devastation. "It came looking for us," Liam thought as Otto gave the sign to cross the water. Moving to follow the course of the creek toward the troll's camp, it was Nori who raised the red flag first. Signaling for the others to pause, he lifted a hand to his ear and cupped it in the universal sign for everyone to pay attention. Nori gave no other instructions but to stand there and listen. It took a moment to catch on, but when he did, Liam's veins ran cold. The forest was silent. They could hear no birds, no squirrels, no crickets, only the sound of the creek bubbling past. After a moment's shared silence and some concerned looks, Otto motioned for them to continue. Their vigilance now bordered on paranoia as they slunk down the bank to the tunnel that led to the troll's lair. Creeping forward on fractured nerves, they entered the tunnel and ventured down its length. There was no reason to believe that the beast would be there. Liam wasn't sure if they would count themselves as lucky or not if it was. Nevertheless, Otto disappeared into the woods to scout ahead of them as Liam and Nori slunk their way back up the path they had fled down 24 hours earlier. They pulled themselves to a stop as soon as the rim of the clearing was in sight and began the long wait for Otto to return. Wrapping his thumbs into his belt as they waited, Liam was struck by how calm he felt. Only the day before, not far from this spot, he had begun to panic over what was now, looking back, a far less dangerous situation. Nori had helped calm him down, as did the gift Denholm gave him. Both were still by his side, Nori keeping watch with him, and the present tucked safely into its pouch. Before Liam could linger on what that meant, his thoughts were again interrupted by the sudden appearance of Otto. Waving them forward, Nori and Liam again fell in line behind their hunter friend, who guided them to the rim of the clearing. Laying flat like they did the day before, Liam found himself looking into what should have been a familiar space. The clearing where everything went wrong the day before had not been spared from the beast's rampage. All around the open space, he spotted upturned rocks that hadn't been there the day before. It was as if the troll had angrily dug at the ground in hopes they might spring from the hole so it could crush them. Even the conical log tower hadn't escaped its wrath, now laying toppled to one side. "I don't see it anywhere. Just another new tunnel to the south." Otto was the first to break their vow of silence. "But I thought I'd give Liam the final call. He's the one who spotted it yesterday." Liam pointed to himself while raising his eyebrows. "Me?" he mouthed, and Otto nodded. Cautiously, Liam lifted his head above the edge of the berm and looked into the clearing again. This time, he paid special attention to the upturned rocks and the trees encircling the space. "I don't see anything," Liam reported, lowering himself back to the ground. "You're sure?" Nori asked. Liam nodded. "Nothing is standing out to me, not the way the stump did yesterday." Otto took this as his cue to stand up and stalk into the clearing, setting his sights on the new tunnel. When, after several moments, nothing appeared from the darkness of the forest to kill him, Nori and Liam joined Otto at the mouth of the yawning chasm cut through the twigs and branches of the trees. "Most of the footprints in the clearing are easily a day old." Otto motioned back towards the clearing. "These," he pointed to specific footprints at the mouth of the tunnel, their dirt still damp. "These are from this morning, 3-4 hours ago, maybe less." Once again facing the opening of another ominous tunnel through the woods, the three took a moment to steel themselves for what might lie ahead. Nori took a moment to check over the pouches slung around his waist. Otto counted through the already diminished stock of arrows in his quiver. And Liam took a moment to look around the clearing again, already sure that the item he needed for his part in the plan was in place. "Ready?" Otto asked as Nori closed the final pouch on his belt. "Ready," his partner nodded. Liam both looked to their makeshift apprentice. "It doesn't damage the trees." Liam's eyes were still on the forest. "What?" Otto looked to Nori for clarification, but his partner had none to give. "It hasn't damaged any of the trees." Liam turned to the others and motioned towards the woods. "Of course it has." Nori pointed to the collection of logs that had formed the totem. "It pushed these over, and the ones at the trailhead. But it doesn't break them. They're not snapped off and tossed aside. They've been plucked, stacked over there where they won't get damaged." "All the others were shoved over, half out of the ground," Otto pointed out. "It was running from a fight then," Liam countered. "So it's a conscientious troll?" Nori snorted. You're reading too much into it. Be careful. Otto walked to the mouth of the tunnel. A troll is not a person. It's a monster. A wild animal. Albeit a smart wild animal. Start trying to make it human in your head, and you'll lose sight of what needs to be done. Right. Liam's head bobbed as he moved to the tunnel. Anthropomorphizing any animal could be dangerous. Many back home had problems with their dogs and cats because they painted human traits over their behaviors. Imagine how dangerous it would be to do the same to a 3-ton giant made of stone. Just seemed weird. It's supposed to be weird. It's a troll. Nori dismissed Liam's concern as Otto motioned for the troop to return to their earlier silent practices. Like the other troll tunnel before it, this one meandered through the trees as it headed south. All along the floor of this passage, the ground was littered with broken branches, leaving few to hang overhead as they traveled. Liam noted that along with the higher percentage of downed branches, there seemed to be more instances of stripped bark along the canopy of the tree line. That's just high enough it could be the beast's shoulder, Liam thought as they trekked in silence. It's brushing the bark off with its side as it walks around the trees. Liam pushed the fact to the back of his mind for his subconscious to mull over, as he had done with all the other things he had been observing about the creature. Right now, he needed all of his mental bandwidth to focus on the safety of himself and his friends. The path continued to snake through the woods, sticking close to the creek. For much of the early afternoon, Liam could see its waters through the trees, and on several occasions, the tunnel broke back out to its banks. We're getting awfully far from the camp. Much of Nori's voice carried away downstream as the trio again stopped by the growing waterway. The further south they traveled, the more the waters swelled. Soon, it would be impossible to think of it as a creek. It's going to be a dark walk back, Otto agreed from where he crouched on the bank. Already, the sun was hours into its descent. The walk back would be filled with different sorts of hazards now. Trip risks that had been avoided in the dim light of day would soon have the potential to sprain an ankle or snap a foot, which was nothing when compared with being smashed to death by a troll, but still painful and mighty inconvenient. Do you think it's heading so far south to get away from the loggers? Liam took the break as a chance to snack on a quick piece of jerky. There had been no stopping for lunch. On this trip, stomachs were kept full on demand according to each party member's needs. Moving on to somewhere away from all the people. That would be nice. Otto shook his head. But the camp has a processing site along this creek, not much further south, and the trail is getting warmer the closer we get. You think it's heading there instead? Liam's shoulders slumped when Otto nodded his head in response. How long do you think it will be until we catch up to it? Nori capped off his canteen after filling it with water from the creek. I'd wager this track is less than an hour old. Otto stood back to his full height and stretched his back. Be prepared. We'll be in the thick of it soon. Once again, the trio turned to leave the banks of the creek, their canteens full and their senses on high alert. Their physical exertion up until this point hadn't been great, but Liam was starting to find the constant state of attention exhausting. It was like sitting through a marathon of boring lectures, one after the other, for hours on end, except that failing this class would mean his death and the death of several others. Hold up a second. Liam felt the pressure at one of his elbows and turned to find Nori behind him. The adventurer waved Otto forward, and his partner gave them space. What? Liam glanced to the retreating form of Otto and then back to his friend, his eyes squinting and his brow furrowing. Look. Nori rubbed a hand across his mouth and chin before continuing. Made of wood or not, this might not end well, Nori started. No. Liam shook his head and waved his hands. I don't want to hear this. Nori latched onto Liam's elbow tighter so he couldn't wander off. Well, you need to. The Silver Rank's eyes looked to the canopy above them before returning to face Liam. The younger man could see the worry in them. It's a solid plan, but it could still go wrong. If it does, if something happens to Otto and me, you run. You run as fast as you can. He turned back to the creek and pointed to the far bank. Head east. Don't stop until you clear the edge of the forest. This is ridiculous. Liam wanted to tune him out. He didn't want to worry about losing his friends, but deep down he knew the advice was solid, and they were just keeping an eye out for his well-being. You run out of the forest, Nori continued, ignoring the protestations. Once clear, head north along the tree line. You'll find the path back to camp eventually. grab the gear and the horses, and head back to Stawson. Burgett will know what to do. If it's still behind you when you hit the fields..." Norrie didn't finish. Liam already understood what it meant if he hadn't outrun the beast by then. Norrie released his grip on Liam's arm and walked back to the tunnel. The trio again set out in search for the troll. The vibrations in the ground preceded the deep rumble ahead of them by almost a minute, which the adventurers spent frozen, their eyes and ears spread thin across the surrounding woods. When the bass rumble finally did hit them, Otto flipped the hood of his jacket over his head and, without a word or signal, dissolved into the trees surrounding them. Norrie patted Liam on the shoulder, and the two shared a long look before Norrie nodded and disappeared into the brush around the next corner. The three wouldn't see each other again until after the fight, only if everything went according to plan. This was it. Walking alone, and wishing himself quite small, Liam too came to the bend in the path. He peeked around a large tree and discovered the source of the sound. Fear pulsed from his stomach into the rest of his body. The great lumbering mass of the troll stood at the center of a small clearing, one it must have just finished creating. Nearby, there was a small vertical cone made of the 4 trees that had plucked to make the space. Liam looked on as the creature worked at tending something lodged in the ground. In the faint light of the late afternoon, he could make out the edges of a nest, made from leaves and brown pine needles collected from the nearby ground. It must be making its bed for the night, Liam thought as he watched. His attention dwelled on the creature for another moment before he left the safety of the tunnel and slipped into the woods. He did his best to disappear among the foliage the way Otto had. Without the others in sight, Liam had no real way of anticipating the beginning of their attack. His instructions were to watch for a specific moment in the fight that would serve as his signal. Then, and only then, was Liam supposed to play his part. Small as it was still crucial to the success of their operation. From his vantage point hidden behind a tree in the woods, Liam could keep an eye on the creature going about its business. He had been right. The large beast looked to be preparing to bed down for the night. From behind his tree, he could also clearly see the mouth of the tunnel, as well as the opposing wall of the clearing. That is where it all began from. A single golden arrow struck out from a dark gap in the trees, vibrating through the air on its path toward the troll. Shadows raced irregularly across the ground, emanating from the glow of the shimmering projectile. When it struck its target, the head of the arrow shattered, and 1,000 sparks rained down onto the moss-covered back of the stone giant. The troll reared back and let out a challenging bellow as the sparks rained down around it. The damp final days of spring kept the moss on its back from catching, as Liam was sure Otto intended. As its call came to an end, the trees near Liam appeared to vibrate, pulling his attention to their shaking leaves. They almost made him miss the violent turn of the creature as it spun around, seeking the source of the attack. His attention returned to the beast just in time to see it hone in on where Otto lay hidden from Liam's view among the trees. This is it. Liam turned back to where he knew the mouth of the tunnel to be. I guess this is where we find out if wooden trolls burn. On schedule, a red streak leapt from inside the mouth of the troll tunnel. Less than a second later, the fireball distorted as it slammed into the monster's exposed back. The smell of burning foliage drifted into the air as smoke rose from the undamaged rock of the beast's back. To his surprise, the troll remained focused on the hunter hidden among the trees. Perhaps it was too angry to care about the fire, or maybe it was learning. As the brute stalked forward, the ground shook. Its massive weight drove into the earth through legs of stone the size of small trees as it stalked toward Otto. Again, another blur of red and yellow motion burst from the mouth of the green tunnel. This time, Liam could make out the shadow of the spellcaster projected onto the trees surrounding him. When the conflagration again singed moss from the troll's back, it finally did as expected and turned to find Norrie. Liam looked on as Otto and Norrie drove attack after attack into the creature, taking turns keeping its attention off of each other while they worked to damage the troll. The heat from the ever-increasing fire spells splashed through the trees and into Liam's face as they kept working to ignite the wood of the troll's body. Liam watched as the onslaught burned away portions of the grassy coverings that skinned the troll. Even as waves of heat began emanating from its stones, he could see no evidence that the wooden parts of its body had ignited. What he thought he saw, however, made him step back. In the dim light of the fading evening, Liam thought he could see sections of the creature beginning to glow. As quickly as the idea came to him, however, it was cut short. Done with the back and forth, the troll surged forward, its arms outstretched towards the mouth of the tunnel. Forcing another scream of frustration into the surrounding woods, it brought its massive, balled hands down on Nori's hiding spot, its dense fists pushing the trees aside like nothing more than weeds. The impact shot dirt and wood into the air, splintering the trees. Liam could see no signs of his friend, but there was no time for concern. Here was the moment Liam had been lying in wait for. Liam emerged from behind his tree, his legs pumping as hard as they could as he shot toward the troll. The heat already radiating from the monster made his eyes water and his skin tense, each step worsening the burning sensation spreading across his body. Reaching the nearest sunken arm of the beast, Liam pushed off with both legs and leapt into the air. He floated momentarily over the craggy forearms of their foe before launching a fist-sized clay bottle at the target under him. The vessel shattered against the stone, and the thick liquid inside the pot scattered across the dirt. The ground writhed as suddenly the plants squirmed their way across the ground. All at once, the sprouts and grasses of the undergrowth erupted into the air, forming a mass of vines and saplings that erupted from the earth and entangled its arms. The collection of greenery spread quickly across the troll's body, locking it tight to the earth. No matter how hard it fought against the pull of the plants, it couldn't escape its new bonds. Liam skidded to a stop, planting his hands against a tree to keep himself from slamming into it. He turned to look back at his handiwork, and another glowing arrow, this one brighter than the last, rocked the creature from behind. It burned away a small section of the beast's bindings, but new plants wriggled their way across its body to take their place. Another blast found its place in the side of the beast as Otto stepped out from among the trees. His bow hung from one shoulder, leaving his hands free in front of him to cast the ever-strengthening fire spells that were now required. On the other side of the clearing, more flames erupted from the mouth of the tunnel as Nori too made himself visible, the magic caster looking as though he had, once again, avoided the troll's attempt on his life. Liam looked on from the sidelines as fire spell after fire spell was cast onto the creature. He heard its bellows of angers deform as the attack went on, slipping into wails and screams. As his friend's onslaught continued, a portion of the mound of plants burned away, and for the first time Liam saw the face of the beast. It was arranged much the same way as humans. Eyes, mouth, 2 small holes for nostrils. Its brow was heavy, further defined by a change in the stone's color. The features were scrunched in a furious glare that it stabbed out to its tormentors. On its face, Liam could make out nothing but boiling rage. Another spell, Liam couldn't be sure it was any different from the others, sent a gout of flame pounding into its side. The flames on its back drove higher into the dark canopy of the forest, singeing what low-hanging branches remained. It lit! It lit! Nori's voice rang out across the clearing. It's burning! Its defiant roars reduced to a low groan as the fight began to fade from it. Otto backed away from the angry beast as it tried to push against its bindings. The mass of plants still grew, constantly reaching out and reattaching itself to any part of the troll where they found purchase. Denholm had been right. Too much of the church's fertilizer was a very dangerous thing. Otto picked his path around the struggling troll carefully and took up position next to Liam and Nori at the mouth of the tunnel. There, they stared in dismay as their quarry slowly burned before them. It's a horrible way to go. The light cast from the burning mass before them flickered across Otto's face as he looked on, killer or not. Nori slowly nodded, his tongue firmly wedged between clenched teeth. There wasn't a better way. The hunter reached up and scratched at his face, shaking his head. Still. Liam watched on in silence as the troll stopped pushing back against the mass of plants. His stomach turned as his mind forced him to imagine what it was like to be trapped, burning alive. The fire raging on its back began to diminish, the flames no longer licking at the trees overhead. For the first time since entering the fight, Liam got a good look at the bark and wood that made up parts of the troll through the burning plant life. His heart skipped a beat. When he touched the stump the day before, it had reminded him of concrete. It's why he worried about the plan to begin with. They couldn't burn away stone. Still, Otto had insisted the wood would ignite, and they moved forward with the plan. But now, to Liam's horror, instead of a charred mass of bark and timber, what stared back at him through the gap was the dull red glow of heated stone. The crags of the bark, the smooth texture of the wood, all glowed like coal in a furnace. It was at this same moment that Liam realized the plants had stopped regenerating. Denholm's potion had run out. It's not burning. Liam didn't mean to whisper. He meant to shout it. He meant it to be a warning. but the words stalled in his throat. What was that? Nori turned to him, eyes wide as his brain caught up to his ears. The world slowed down for Liam again. The sensations of the moment smeared together. Nori turning to talk to him, the flames of the fire crackling as they burned through the vines, the intense heat as its hand broke free from the bindings and shot toward Otto, the give of the dirt under his feet as Liam launched himself at his mentors, the way his wrists bent awkwardly as he shoved each of them from the tunnel and into the woods. The trio landed, crashing into each other in the underbrush of the forest floor. They couldn't help but watch, eyes wide and hearts pounding, as the troll freed itself from the burning bindings and stood to its full height. Trees shook, and their ears ached from the sheer volume of the creature's scream. All around, smaller fires ignited as its burning bindings fell to the dry floor of the woods. Liam stood, his eyes on the soft glow of the heat they had infused into the beast's body. He was fascinated by the light emitting from the rock, much the same way as the stump had a day earlier. Something about it just drew him in. Otto watched his friend stare into the glow of the troll's rocks as he and his partner rose to their feet. Concerned, he gave Liam a shove in the direction of camp and made to make a run for it. When Liam didn't budge, he tried again, but still he remained rooted to the spot. No longer able to wait for his friend's senses to return, Otto grabbed Liam and threw him over his shoulder. The hunter turned away from their failed trap and moved as fast as he was able into the woods. Liam watched as the glowing behemoth faded among the trees. Its attention turned not to the fleeing adventurers, but the woods around it. Desperately, it swatted at the fires springing up all around it, its red, hot hands starting new ones every place it touched. Liam of Carcanne was written by Will Hansen. This chapter has been read for you by the author. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not leave a comment? I'd love to hear what you think. Likewise, every like, rating, and subscription helps. Liam of Carcanne is now available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all other major podcast distributors. Want more information on Liam or Will? Visit the Wooks Books YouTube channel, Facebook page, or website, all linked in the description. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.